Story 1. The Fourth Path. In the days of the ancient lands of Israel, there lived a man named Eliab, a father to 3 young children. Eliab was a man of good standing in his village, known for his work and wisdom, though like many others, he occasionally struggled with temptations that led him astray. One day, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Eliab walked with his children through a beautiful orchard. The trees were heavy with fruit. Their branches bowed under the weight of ripe, luscious apples, figs, and pomegranates, all glistening in the warm afternoon light. The sight of the fruit stirred a desire within Eliab's heart, a desire he tried to ignore but could not. He looked around, and seeing that the orchard was largely unguarded, he turned to his children and said, "Children, I need you to help me. You see that orchard? Those fruits would make a fine meal for us, and no one is watching. You 3 will stand guard at the paths leading into the orchard, so we can gather some fruit. If anyone comes, you must shout and warn me. We will take only what is needed." The children nodded eagerly, though they did not fully understand the consequences of their father's request. They took their positions at the 3 paths that led into the orchard, and Eliab began to pick the ripest fruit, gathering it quickly, his heart racing with excitement at the thought of what he had taken. But just as he reached for another apple, his youngest child, a boy named Benjamin, called out from his post, "Father, there is still another path. No one is guarding it." Eliab froze in place, a chill running through him. He glanced toward Benjamin, perplexed. "What do you mean, another path? There are only 3 paths leading here. What are you talking about?" Benjamin, his eyes full of sincerity, pointed upward beyond the trees and into the clear blue sky where the sun was beginning to set. "The path to the heavens, Father, the path that only God can see." At these words, a deep sense of shame washed over Eliab. His face turned red, not from anger or embarrassment at his child, but from the realization that even though he had hidden his actions from the eyes of others, there was one whom he could not deceive: God. The thought of the path to heaven, the path where his every action was seen by the Lord, struck him to the core. The weight of his wrongdoing suddenly became clear. He had been so focused on the temptation of the moment, so consumed with the desire for the fruit, that he had forgotten the one who truly saw all things. Without saying a word, Eliab dropped the fruit he had gathered and turned back toward his children, leading them away from the orchard. As they walked home in silence, Eliab's heart was heavy with guilt, but also with a newfound understanding. His son had spoken the truth. There was a 4th path, a path that led to God, and it was always open for him to walk, no matter where he was or what he did. He could not hide from God's gaze. When they reached home, Eliab sat down with his children, his voice gentle but firm. "My children," he began, "today I have learned an important lesson. You see, we often think we can hide our actions from the world, but there is always a higher way, the path to the Lord. Psalm 139:7-10 says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." The Lord sees all, even when we think no one is watching. I made a mistake today, and I must ask for forgiveness, not only from you, but from God, for my actions were wrong. Eliab looked into his children's eyes, hoping they understood the lesson he had just learned. We must live our lives with integrity, knowing that God sees all things. Let us never forget that the path to heaven is always before us, guiding us to walk in righteousness, even when no one else is looking. As Matthew 5:14 teaches us, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." Let our actions be a reflection of the light of God. His children nodded, their hearts understanding the weight of their father's words. Eliab had not only taught them a valuable lesson, but had also come to a deeper understanding of his own need for God's guidance and forgiveness. In that moment, Eliab knew that though he could not undo the wrong he had done, he could take steps to live with integrity from that day forward, walking on the path that led to God. He prayed for strength to do so, remembering the wisdom in Proverbs 4:25-27. "Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways." Eliab's heart was lightened, for he had learned that the most important path, the path that led to righteousness, was always open to those who sought it with a sincere heart. And so from that day forward, Eliab never forgot the lesson of the fourth path, the path that leads to God, and he sought to walk it with humility, knowing that the Lord's watchful eye was always upon him. Story 2. Practice makes perfect. In the ancient land of Israel, during a time of peace and prosperity, there lived a skilled and humble young man named Nathaniel. Nathaniel was renowned throughout the village for his skill with the bow and arrow. His accuracy was unmatched, and he could strike his target every time with ease. The villagers would gather around to watch him practice, and many were in awe of his precision. As Nathaniel practiced one afternoon in the village square, a large crowd had gathered to witness his skill. He took careful aim, released the arrow, and it struck the target dead center, causing the crowd to cheer. Over and over again, Nathaniel shot arrows with flawless accuracy, drawing even more admiration from the villagers. But among the crowd there was an old man, a humble vendor who sold oil by the market, watching silently. Despite the praise that Nathaniel was receiving, the old man shook his head with a look of indifference. Nathaniel noticed this and felt a slight sting of irritation. His pride was challenged by the old man's dismissive attitude. Curious and a little offended, Nathaniel walked over to the old man and asked, "Why do you shake your head, old man? Do you think I'm not skilled? I am the best archer in the land. Do you think you could do better?" The old man, unfazed by Nathaniel's challenge, responded, "I do not know how to shoot a bow, young man, but I think your skill is nothing special. It is simply a matter of practice. You do it over and over again until it becomes second nature to you." Nathaniel, now feeling insulted, snapped back, "How dare you say such a thing? I have practiced my whole life for this skill, and you dismiss it so easily? You cannot even shoot a bow. What do you know?" The old man remained calm, not rising to Nathaniel's anger. He looked up at the young archer and said, "I may not be able to shoot a bow, but I have my own skill. I sell oil, and I can pour it from a jug without spilling a drop. I will show you." The old man took a small jug of oil and placed a coin on top of it. He then began to pour the oil through the small hole in the center of the coin, carefully filling the jug without spilling a single drop. When he had finished, the coin remained clean, with no oil on it whatsoever. "You see, young man," the old man said with a gentle smile, "it is not a special skill. It is simply something I have done many times until it became second nature. I have poured oil like this for so long that I no longer need to think about it. It is not magic. It is simply the result of practice." Nathaniel stood in silence, watching the old man with a mixture of awe and humility. He realized that the old man was right. His own skill with the bow was the result of countless hours of practice, and in the same way, the old man's ability to pour oil without spilling it was the fruit of his own experience. As Nathaniel reflected on this, he was reminded of the teachings from the book of Proverbs, where it says, "Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men." Proverbs 22:29. Nathaniel understood now that his talent, like the old man's, was not something to boast about, but something that came through diligent practice and patience. True skill, he realized, was a gift from God, but it was also something that required humility and constant effort. He turned to the old man and said, "I see now that you are right. I have been proud of my skill, but I have forgotten the value of humility and the importance of constant practice. Thank you for teaching me this lesson." The old man nodded and smiled kindly. "It is not our talents that define us, young man, but our character. And true greatness comes not from boasting, but from humility and service to others. As it is written in James 4:6, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." From that day forward, Nathaniel no longer boasted of his skill. He practiced quietly and humbly, using his talent not for praise, but to serve others. He understood that the true measure of a person's worth was not in their outward achievements, but in their inner character and humility. And as Nathaniel grew in his skill, he also grew in wisdom and humility. He learned that no matter how skilled one might become, there was always more to learn and always room for growth. He walked with a humble heart, knowing that his gifts were meant to serve others, and that true greatness in God's eyes was measured by humility and service, as Christ himself taught. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Matthew 20:26. Nathanael's life became a testimony to the power of practice, humility, and service, and his name was remembered not for his skill with the bow, but for the way he lived his life with grace and humility, always seeking to serve and uplift others, just as Christ did for us. Story 3. CENTIQUE greed. In the beginning, when God created all the creatures of the earth, he gave each one its place and purpose. Among his creations was the centipede, a humble creature with many legs, though in the beginning it was designed with only a few. Despite its simple design, the centipede moved swiftly, able to crawl through the earth with agility. However, the centipede was not content with what it had. One day, as the centipede observed the other animals, deer, antelope, and various creatures with many legs, it grew envious. The swift movement of the other animals filled it with discontent, and it began to complain. Why do they move so swiftly while I remain slow, even with my many legs? Surely the more legs one has, the faster one can run. Why should I be left behind? The centipede, consumed by envy and desire, decided to make a bold request. It approached the Lord with a humble yet anxious heart and said, "O Lord, I ask of you, grant me more legs, that I might run as fast as the others, and no longer be left behind in the race of life." The Lord, in his wisdom, saw the centipede's heart full of desire, and he allowed it to make its request. He took many legs from his creation and offered them to the centipede, saying, "Take as many legs as you desire, and attach them to yourself, that you may be swift as the wind." The centipede, eager and greedy, began to attach the legs one by one, placing them in every available space on its body. It did not stop until its entire body was covered in legs, too many to count. The centipede was satisfied, looking at itself in admiration, thinking, "Now I can run as fast as a gazelle, like an arrow in the wind. No creature shall outrun me." But when the centipede attempted to run, it soon realized its folly. With so many legs moving in different directions, it could not control its body. Each leg seemed to have a mind of its own, pulling the centipede in different directions. The centipede tried to take a step, but found itself stumbling, its body unable to move in harmony. It was no longer swift, it was slower than before. Each step required great effort as it struggled to align its legs, and what was once easy became an arduous task. In that moment, the centipede understood the lesson God had set before it. Its desire for more had led to its downfall. What had once worked perfectly, its simple, natural movement, had been destroyed by its greed and overreach. The centipede, humbled and regretful, realized the wisdom of contentment. The Bible reminds us in Philippians 4:11-12, where Paul writes, "I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want." The centipede's experience was a stark reminder of the dangers of greed and discontent. It had been given everything it needed to move swiftly and with purpose, but its greed led it to want more than it could handle. Just as Proverbs 15:16 teaches, "Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil," the centipede learned that having more did not lead to happiness, but to confusion and struggle. In the end, the centipede learned to be thankful for what it had, and it returned to its original form, grateful for the simple, natural way it was designed to move. The lesson was clear. True fulfillment comes not from having more, but from being content with what God has given us. As Christians, we are reminded in Hebrews 13:5, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.'" The centipede's journey is a reminder for us all to seek contentment, trust in God's provision, and not be swayed by the temptation to chase after more than we need. From that day forward, the centipede no longer complained about its legs or its pace. It learned that it was enough just as it was, and that God's design for each of us is perfect in its own way. Story 4. Dedication. In the time of the early church, in a small village near the shores of Galilee, there lived a faithful man named Simon. Simon was known throughout the village for his deep reverence and commitment to the teachings of Christ. He attended every service, helped the poor, and often volunteered to assist the elders in the community. His heart was open, and he always sought ways to please the Lord. One evening, after a powerful sermon delivered by Pastor Thomas, Simon felt a deep sense of gratitude and conviction. The message had spoken directly to his heart, and as the congregation gathered around, Simon approached the pastor with a look of sincerity. "Pastor," Simon said with fervor, "I have been moved by the words of the Lord today. I feel the call to offer everything I have in service to Him. I am ready to give all of myself to God." Pastor Thomas, a man known for his wisdom and discernment, looked kindly at Simon. He could see the genuine desire in Simon's eyes, but he also knew the importance of understanding the depth of commitment that true discipleship required. Pastor Thomas smiled and asked, "Simon, if you had 2 cars, would you be willing to give one to the Lord?" Simon's eyes brightened as he immediately answered, "Yes, I would willingly give one of my cars to the Lord if I had 2. Pastor Thomas nodded, then asked a deeper question. "And if you had 2 houses, would you be willing to give one to the Lord?" Simon did not hesitate, his heart swelling with the thought of offering his wealth to the Lord's service. "Yes, Pastor, I would give 1 house. Everything belongs to God, and I would not hesitate." Pastor Thomas then paused and posed a simpler, more personal question. "If you had 2 pairs of shoes, would you be willing to give 1 pair to the Lord?" This time, Simon's face grew thoughtful, and after a moment of hesitation, he replied, "No, Pastor, I can't give away a pair of shoes. I only have 2 pairs. Pastor Thomas raised an eyebrow and gently inquired, "Why, Simon, do you say no?" Simon looked down at his shoes, his voice filled with a sense of unease. "Pastor, I don't have 2 cars, nor do I own 2 houses, but I have 2 pairs of shoes, and I cannot part with them." Pastor Thomas looked at Simon with understanding and a knowing smile. He had just witnessed a beautiful moment of revelation, for Simon had unwittingly exposed the very heart of the challenge many face in their walk of faith. Pastor Thomas placed his hand on Simon's shoulder and began to speak. "Simon, I understand. You see, it is easy to offer what we have in abundance. It is easy to give away something we have more than enough of. But the true test of our faith and devotion lies in the willingness to give when it costs us something, when it touches the very things we hold dear. Jesus said in Luke 14:33, "In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." True discipleship is not about giving what is easy, but about offering even the things that matter most to us. Simon's eyes filled with understanding. He realized that while it was easy to offer what he had in excess, the true challenge lay in surrendering the things he cherished, even those things that seemed small and insignificant. Pastor Thomas continued, "Remember the words of Jesus in Mark 12:41-44, when he observed the widow putting 2 small coins into the offering box. He said, 'Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on.' The widow's offering was not measured by its monetary value, but by her willingness to give everything she had." Simon's heart was moved. He understood now that true sacrifice was not about giving away only what was easy, but about offering what was precious, what he held closest to his heart. His willingness to surrender his own comfort and security for the sake of God's will was the ultimate expression of faith. Simon took a deep breath, and with a new sense of resolve, he said, "Pastor, I see now that it is not about the quantity of what we give, but the quality of our heart when we give. I will give what I have, not just the excess, but from the very core of my being, knowing that everything I have is a gift from God. I will trust that He will provide for me, just as He has promised in Philippians 4:19, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus." Pastor Thomas smiled, his heart filled with joy at Simon's growth. He knew that Simon had taken a significant step in his journey of faith. The lesson was clear. The heart of discipleship is not in the things we give, but in the willingness to give of ourselves, trusting in God's provision and love. As the congregation left the church that day, Simon walked with a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that his walk with Christ was not about what he could keep for himself, but about what he was willing to give, even when it cost him something precious. His heart was open, ready to serve and to live out the words of Jesus in his daily life. And as the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Simon now knew that true giving, true discipleship, came from the heart, and it was in giving that he would find his greatest blessing. From that day forward, Simon lived with a heart full of gratitude, always seeking to give with joy, knowing that in doing so, he was following the example of Christ, who gave his life for the world. Story 5. The Magic Stone. In a small village nestled among the hills of Judah, there lived a humble group of women who spent their days caring for their families and tending to the needs of their community. One day, as they were gathering in the town square to chat, a strange man appeared at the edge of the village. He was dressed in unusual clothes, with a peculiar air about him. As he approached, he spoke to the women gathered nearby. "I have a miraculous stone," he said, holding up a small, ordinary-looking rock. "If you place it in water and boil it, it will turn into a delicious pot of soup. I will show you now." Intrigued by his claim, one of the women asked the others to help bring a large pot and a bucket of water. They set up a fire in the center of the village square, and the man carefully placed the stone into the pot of water, stirring it with great reverence. He then tasted the water and smiled. "Ah, it's delicious!" he declared, nodding approvingly. "But you know, it would taste even better with a little bit of onion." One of the women, eager to see the stone's power, hurried to her house and returned with onions. The man stirred the pot again and tasted it, his face lighting up. "Ah, much better! But if we had some meat, it would truly bring out the flavor." Without hesitation, another woman ran home to fetch meat, and soon the pot was stirred again, now with even more ingredients. The man tasted it again. "It's truly delightful, but a little bit of salt would make it perfect," he suggested. Once more, the villagers rallied, bringing salt, pepper, and other ingredients from their homes. Each time the man tasted the soup, and each time he requested something more. The villagers worked together in harmony, each person contributing what they had. As they all worked together, the soup began to take shape, and soon enough, it was ready for all to enjoy. As the last of the ingredients were added, and the aroma of the soup filled the air, the people gathered around the pot, eagerly awaiting their share. When they tasted the soup, they found it to be the most delicious they had ever had. A perfect blend of flavors that satisfied them beyond measure. The women looked at the man in wonder, marveling at how such a simple stone had turned into such a magnificent feast. But as they looked closer, they realized something important. The stone itself was ordinary. It had no magical properties. The true miracle was the way they all came together, contributing what they had, working in unity for a common purpose. It was then that one of the women, reflecting on the power of cooperation and sharing, recalled the words of Jesus in Matthew 18:20, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I with them." The miracle was not in the stone, but in the unity and love that each person brought to the table. Each contribution, no matter how small, made the soup a feast that was greater than the sum of its parts. The village learned a profound lesson that day. The true miracle of life does not lie in individual wealth or power, but in the simple act of working together in love and generosity. As 1 Corinthians 12 verse 12 says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ." In the same way, when the people of God come together, they create something far greater than any individual effort could accomplish. From that day forward, the villagers lived with a renewed sense of purpose and community. They knew that by sharing their resources, their talents, and their love with one another, they could create a life far richer than they could have on their own. And as the Apostle Paul reminded the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. The story of the stone that turned into soup became a cherished lesson in the village, a lesson not about the stone itself, but about the power of unity, generosity, and faith. When we come together as one body, working in harmony for a common purpose, the miracles of God are made manifest in our lives. Story 6. Daughter and daughter-in-law. In the land of Galilee, there were two women sitting together in the village square, enjoying the cool shade of the olive trees as they exchanged stories. Both women had children who were married, but their lives had taken very different turns. One woman, named Miriam, sat with a weary face, her shoulders heavy with the burdens of a mother concerned for her son. The other, named Sarah, seemed much more content, a smile often gracing her face as she spoke. The two women began a conversation about their children. Miriam sighed deeply as she asked Sarah, "How is your son? Is he doing well in his marriage?" Sarah smiled warmly, but Miriam could hear the sadness in her voice as she responded, "Ah, my son, it's such a burden. His wife, she is lazy and refuses to do any work. She doesn't cook, she doesn't clean, she doesn't even take care of their children. My son, every single morning, must bring her food to her bed. I worry for him. He's a kind man, but he's becoming exhausted, and his house is in disarray. It breaks my heart to see him this way." Tears filled Miriam's eyes as she recounted the struggles her son had faced with his marriage. She shook her head, her voice quivering with emotion. "I don't know how he'll manage this life. I fear it will be the death of him. His wife cares only for herself." After a pause, Miriam looked at Sarah and asked, "And how is your daughter? I hear she married well." Sarah's face lit up and she responded with joy. "Ah, my daughter, she is so fortunate. Her husband is a good man, a true servant. He cares for all the work in their home. He cooks, he cleans, he even cares for the children, and every morning he brings her food in bed. It's a beautiful thing to witness. She is so blessed." Miriam listened, her heart heavy with sorrow. It was clear that Sarah's daughter-in-law had been a source of constant frustration for her, while Sarah's daughter seemed to have everything she could wish for in a husband. Yet, as the conversation went on, Miriam began to reflect on something deeper. She thought of the words of Jesus in Matthew 20:26-28. "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Miriam had seen firsthand the struggles her son faced with his wife's selfishness, but she had also been reminded of the ultimate example of service, Jesus Christ, who had come not to be served, but to serve others, showing that love and humility were the truest forms of greatness. As Miriam pondered these teachings, she realized something powerful. She had been focused on the selfishness of her daughter-in-law and the comfort of Sarah's daughter. But what she had not fully considered was the role of love and service in the family. Jesus taught his followers to love one another as he had loved them. In a marriage, true love was not about being served, but about serving one another. Jesus had said in John 13:34, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Miriam began to understand that in her son's marriage, there was an opportunity for growth, not only for his wife, but for him as well. In this reflection, Miriam's sorrow transformed into a prayerful hope. She knew now that love, kindness, and service were the foundation of a marriage. She began to consider how her son could show love and service in his marriage, and how his wife, too, could learn to serve in humility, as Christ had done. Miriam looked at Sarah, who was still smiling with pride about her daughter's marriage. Miriam quietly said, "Perhaps, Sarah, my son's wife has much to learn, but we must also teach them how to love and serve, just as Christ has taught us. We cannot expect a perfect marriage without both partners working together, humbling themselves, and serving one another in love." Sarah's smile softened as she understood. She had always thought her daughter's marriage was perfect because her son-in-law was so kind and devoted. But now she saw that true love and service were about more than just one person's actions. It was about both people growing together in faith and humility. Miriam and Sarah sat in silence, both contemplating the lessons that Jesus had taught. They knew that true fulfillment in life did not come from being served, but from serving others in love, as the Lord had demonstrated through his life. The words of 1 Corinthians 13:4-7 echoed in their hearts. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Miriam's heart, once filled with sorrow, now had hope. She knew that with God's grace, her son and his wife could overcome their challenges, and she prayed that they would both come to understand the true meaning of love and service in marriage. And she knew that, with God's guidance, every family could experience the love that Christ had shown to the world.